Representatives from some of the groups that make up the Growing Together New York Coalition. Ron Deutsch is the Executive Director for New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. Next to him, we have Michael Burgess. He served as Aging Commissioner between 2007 and October of last year. He's now a public policy consultant for the New York Statewide Senior Action Council. And then across the table is Tiara Velez. She's with the Community Voices Heard organization. This is an organization committed to improving the lives of low-income New Yorkers. Thanks, everybody, so much for your time. You were down at the Capitol again today, all of you, with a bunch of other people, actually. This is a coalition, as I said, that's growing. Can you talk a little bit about whoever wants to start? Who else is in this coalition? Ron, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, this is a coalition built around faith leaders, so religious organizations and churches, labor unions, community nonprofit organizations, human service organizations, environmental organizations, senior organizations, quite a gamut of different and diverse groups. And everybody's coming together with one common goal, one common message, that if we're going to be talking about shared sacrifice in this year's budget, you know, we need to look across the income spectrum and not just saddle those folks at the bottom end of the income spectrum with the cuts and the reductions in services, but also look to the wealthiest among us who've been doing quite well over the last 2 decades or so, to ask them to join in and help solve our state's budget dilemma.
This is, of course, about the millionaire's tax, but before we get there, Michael, you were talking before we got started a little bit about this is a group that doesn't have a lot of money. I mean, this isn't a well-funded, you know, lobbying organization, unlike Committee to Save New York, which we'll talk about in a second, has raised $10 million. The governor has $4 million, is still raising for his campaign committee to go to war. But then on the other side, 1199 has a lot of money too, NYSET, et cetera. This special interest sort of catchphrase you find a little bit misleading.
Well, I would just hope that you know, people would realize that, you know, you can be against some of the things in the budget without being a special interest that's going to run a big lobbying campaign, because we don't have that kind of money. And somebody has to speak for the poor and the elderly, the disabled, a group that used to be called the Family of New York. And I think that those issues need to be raised here, and we need to have a discussion about some of the impact of these things and see if there's other ways of doing them.
Well, it's when you say the Family of New York, I mean, I think I know what you're getting at, and I'll put the point on it. There has been some discussion, I believe, of the political difference between Andrew Cuomo and his father, and the liberal lion that was Mario Cuomo, who was thought of at one point as a presidential contender, and now we see Andrew Cuomo, different time, different place, different fiscal reality, and a completely different approach, right? In terms of the money issue, there isn't a lot that you can do if you don't have money. I mean, there's some ad campaigns that you can run, et cetera. But you guys are also doing a lot of some grassroots organization. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you've been present at some of these protests against the Committee to Save New York. What's it like out there?
It was interesting to me. I also felt unfair about it, because we went to a $950 party they had, and they were all dressed in tuxedos and drinking champagne, and we're over here suffering, and it's just not fair.
This is what you're talking about, I think, was a Rebney Gala, the Real Estate Board of New York, and they had this annual meeting, and there were protests outside. Right. So your organization represents people who are low income. Specifically, how are they getting hurt in the budget?
Well, right now we're fighting for transitional jobs. We're also fighting for just basically transitional jobs only because it's a decent paying job. Unlike the WEP program, which is a work experience program, and it's called in New York City, they pay you only for your benefits, and they sanction you for little reasons that's unnecessary, which is not fair to us.
You know, what we're talking about here, actually, City Limits, which is a publication also that mostly circulates in New York City, talked about Cuomo's cuts could hit the poor. And I found interesting that these are the things, the big stuff that we focused on was $2.8 billion coming out of Medicaid, which of course hurts low-income people if they can't get access to Medicaid, elderly people if in fact nursing homes are hurt, et cetera. Education, there are some people who say disproportionately those cuts will hurt low-income school districts, but also things like a postponed planned increase in the state's basic public assistance grant rose from 09 to 10 after standing pat. That was David Patterson. Now there's going to be a delay for a $29 million savings. That's a pretty significant thing, isn't it?
I'd say it's very significant because people living on public assistance and the grant levels that are being provided are just so low. I mean, you're talking about below subsistence kind of level of existence, and it's unfortunate that at a time when the governor is saying, you know, we can't afford this minute increase in the grant to people on public assistance, that at the same time we can afford to give a $5 billion a year tax cut to the wealthiest New Yorkers. So I think it's the contrast between these two things that gets people up in arms about this. And, you know, I think the contradictions alone are frightening. I mean, Tiara talked about the Committee to Save New York and going to those protests. I think that's indicative of what's happening. You know, the governor has kind of aligned himself with these powerful real estate tycoons, Wall Street financiers, in order to move his agenda forward. And obviously, they like his agenda. If the agenda doesn't include, them having a tax increase or looking at cutting corporate subsidies or things like that, those are kind of the things that have been untouched in the budget.
Well, let's play devil's advocate for a second, because I've had business interests on this table, and actually they were here yesterday, and they said, there are people who are small businesses who pay the PIT increase that you're talking about, personal income tax. Those are actually not just people who are wealthy. And also, for the record, they're not just millionaires. You're talking about people who make $200,000 and more. Now, for folks like the people that you advocate for, that's an enormous amount of money, right? I mean, it looks like a lot. For a family of four living in New York City, it's not poverty wages, certainly by any matter, but it's also not rich.
Right.
So we're not talking about millionaires, all of them.
The allowance of letting the federal tax cuts continue is a big windfall, unexpected, or possibly unexpected for people in that category. So that certainly helps them. And I think that we're just trying to say that there are a lot of people. When you cut somebody's prescription drugs and make them pay for the premiums for the EPIC program, it's going to cost them hundreds of dollars extra, and they're not going to go back to work and make that money up.
And the Wall Street Journal also reported, though, that about 98% of small businesses don't have incomes over $250,000 a year in terms of revenues generated, so they wouldn't be impacted by this either. So, I think that's one of the arguments, that and the migration argument, right, that wealthy people are going to leave the state if we continue this surcharge, when in reality that's not the case at all. And in fact, if you look at the people who earn over $1 million per year in New York State, literally half of them already live in New Jersey and Connecticut, but they make their money in New York, and that's why they pay New York State income taxes. So they're not going to go to Idaho or Mississippi to make their millions. They're making their millions here in New York. So I think, this notion that if we ask the wealthy, who have done extremely well, again, over the last 20 years and are controlling a disproportionate amount of the income in the state, if we ask them to pay a little bit more in terms of taxes, I don't think that's going to drive them away, and I think that's going to improve the quality of life for everybody in this state.
The job program that you talk about, Tiara, how does it work exactly?
Well, it's a 6 months to a year program, and it helps low-income people like myself, and it's a 4-day-a-week program, and on the last day of the week, which is the 5th day, you get a training. And it helps because it gives you a decent paying paycheck. Mm-hmm. Rather than being on WEP, which is Work Experience Program, it only gives you $82.50 every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And the idea is that at the end, this training that you have will enable you to get a job on your own. Here's the problem. I mean, if the governor says that the whole budget is jobs, 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 the private incentives, getting private dollars, we can't, he says we can't have public dollars being incentivizing business, growing business. It can't just be the state government growing businesses. We want private business here. If there isn't any private business investing, then the jobs that your people are going to be looking for are not going to be there. I mean, isn't that an argument? How do you counteract that argument?
I think that's an argument, but I think you're also seeing a lot of businesses locate here, certainly in the Capital District. We've got global foundries, nanotechnology businesses. Other businesses are coming to this state. So I think when businesses look to choose a place to locate, taxes aren't top of the list. They're looking at infrastructure. Can I get my goods and services to market? They're looking at what's the education level of the workforce that's in that area. Taxes, and you can look at study after study, is not really high up there in terms of where a business locates. So what we have going on now, though, is we provide enormous tax incentives to very large corporations in New York State, and I think at the expense of small businesses, right? So we have these tax credit programs that we spend billions of dollars a year on, whether that's, the former Empire Zone program, a variety of different other business tax credits. If we instead took that money and tried to lower the cost of doing business across the board, we might benefit everybody. But at this point, what we do is create an uneven playing field by providing tax credits to big business at the expense of some small business.
Okay, so just to close the loop here, what comes next? I mean, my understanding is there's going to be a lobby day that you're all preparing for, right? And you're going to be bringing people up, I would expect. But how are you going to convince a governor who says, the millionaire's tax to me looks like a new tax, and I promised no new taxes in my budget, right? So
but that's the one thing the public supports. He keeps going out and saying the people are behind me, and they may be with a lot of the things in it, but on this particular issue, they're not with him. And I think that he will listen to that, I'm sure, as he goes along. It's just an ongoing discussion. But I think he needs to understand that people will weigh whether having that tax put back in place will be able to keep some of these services for low-income people, and that's what the debate is. And we will be going to the people, really, to get their legislators to understand that.
And you will be back talking to your legislators, I would expect, right?
Yes.
And we're, starting next week, we're going out on the road and talking to people in communities across the state. Next week, we have a budget forum in Albany, Long Island, Westchester, New York City, and then we'll be hitting upstate New York as well. So, we're trying to get our message out there that, we are all in this together. And we do believe that if we don't grow together, we're going to continue to pull apart, because we already have the greatest income disparity of any state in the nation right now, the biggest gap between those that earn the most and those that earn the least. The governor has acknowledged this as a problem. I'm hoping that he'll take steps to address it. Doesn't look like it so far. But, we're hopeful, and we want to work with the governor. We don't want this to be confrontational. This is a democracy. It's about an exchange of ideas. Why can't, we talk about different ideas from the governor without, having him cast aspersions on us as these special interests that rule Albany? I don't think, seniors, low-income people, people like myself fighting for tax justice. I don't think we're special interests.
Well, I think you did just talk to him, assuming that he or someone out there might be watching. I want to thank you very much, Ron Deutsch. Thank you. Michael Burgess. Thank you, Tiara Velez. Thank you very much for all of your time, and we will be hearing more from you, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you.